Oh yeah, this is good. This is good. No, really, Routine is fantastic. It's a much quieter horror than we usually get in a sci-fi setting. You'll face oftentimes overwhelming isolation and loneliness aboard Union Plaza, a moon-based thing that's both a tourist station and maybe a research facility to monitor some horrific thing inside of the moon, of course. You awake on the station as an unnamed engineer sent to repair a malfunction in their core systems, and yeah, you're not totally alone on the base. There are a couple of other inhabitants, though you're going to want to avoid them. You spend the next 4 hours or so exploring a derelict base, piecing together what happened to the crew, questioning your own role in all of this, and ultimately trying to uncover what lies within the canal, a sort of natural or unnatural fissure in the moon that's slowly calling everyone towards it. What is the canal? Where is everyone? What is the nature of the things roaming the station? These are the questions you're trying to figure out in Routine. But look, if you take one thing away from this game, it's that it's fucking scary. It's the atmosphere. To me, it's the reason the whole game is so effective. It's much more Ad Astra or Annihilation than Alien Isolation. Well, that's when you're not getting murdered, I mean. It goes with this 80s space age vibe that's, of course, in a lineage with something like the Alien series, but also distinct enough to not feel like a clone. It feels simultaneously brutalist, but weirdly organic. You've got the big boxy white walls of retro space age stuff, but then neon lights and gentle water features, CRTs, VHS tapes, and the flat geometry of Memphis design aesthetics. As the station is breaking down around you, rubber tubing dangles from ceiling tiles like collapsed veins. You see peeled back wall panels in the membrane behind it. It feels less like the mechanical and electrical makeup of a moon base and more like the guts of some living thing, something that you probably shouldn't see. There's a lot of visual elements here, and with how quiet the game is, I couldn't shake a kind of dreamlike quality to it all, especially in the more commercial areas. It's great and elevates an unrelenting tension and uneasiness to the whole thing that really never lets up, like, ever. The gameplay is light, but it's just enough to never feel flat, be it solving some admittedly fantastic little puzzles or avoiding enemies, one of which is kind of whatever and the other is fucking terrifying, but we'll get there. Tie it all together with a trippy, underexplained story, and you've got a mighty, scary, quiet game that I haven't stopped thinking about since I finished it. So please give me a moment of your time so I can talk about it. Okay, so right off the top, I'm gonna spoil most of what you directly play through in the game. I'm gonna talk about puzzles and enemies and levels and things like that. I'm gonna talk about the story and the ending, but I'm not gonna be too exhaustive about it. Just don't consider anything safe. If you'd rather just get my final thoughts, go here. Cool? So it's largely an exploration and puzzle game with light stealth and combat tossed in there. It's not really combat. You can defend yourself from the couple enemies you'll encounter with this sick as hell space-aged Swiss Army knife thing that operates as your weapon, your puzzle solver, your key, your save feature. It's called a CAT, a cat, and it's tied into everything that you do. And more importantly, its design ties in holistically to the world of Routine. It alleviates the game entirely of a HUD, instead asking you to putz around with the settings on this thing to open doors, save your game, and solve puzzles. It's got this great analog design with lots of buttons and switches, and you'll come across some upgrade modules that need swapping in and out when you want to use them. You'll spend a lot of time just messing around with it. You might need to snap a picture of a screen to update your security clearance, or hook up to the Wi-Fi to throw your save screen across the wall like a projector, or blast a circuit to overload a door. It's pretty fantastic and really immersive. It's also your only defensive tool in the game. With the enemies you'll encounter, you can zap them to buy a moment to flee. It relies on batteries to work, but they're scattered in every nook and cranny. It's pretty clear that the devs didn't want to manage a resource economy, so it will never be an issue. Routine is much more about soaking in the visuals and the tension than combating enemies or juggling resources. It's mostly exploration. The first main objective is to end a mysterious lockdown that's been triggered across the system. You'll follow in the footsteps of others before you, working toward the same goal, chasing down their ID badges and codes to get into the system. Most of this stuff is pretty light, like inputting codes or getting around locked doors. But later it'll throw in some really good puzzles like decoding the cipher or cross-referencing chemistry notes to distill a disinfectant in the later stages. It'll give you a couple notes and then send you on your way. These couple puzzles are so good, and they complement the lighter fare really well, keeping the pacing pretty light for most of the game. Even if most of the time you're just kind of moving from space to space, the environments are so unsettling that it never gets boring. You can check your objectives only at the save screen, and even then it just gives you broad strokes, so please pay attention to the notes that you read because within them will often lie next steps, door codes, things like that. The game is slightly more open in the first couple levels with trams connecting the various zones of the station. You could very well accidentally head to the wrong place if you forget what you're doing. However, most of the time you're marched forward pretty linearly, but each zone requires you to explore enough that you can get turned around or lost if you're not paying close attention. Just focus on your goals and you'll be okay. There is a stripped back quality to the game. Quest steps are simple and sensible with very little video gamey logic, and since you spend very little time looking through menus or reading or listening to long-winded exposition, everything just helps build up and retain that super tense atmosphere non-stop. It's hard to get pulled out of the zone when that layer of video game stuff is completely removed. You're always drawn in, never pushed out. Yeah, and the enemies just make it more tense. There's only two, the first being a series of robots that work on the station which have, of course, gone haywire, which means, of course, they're murderous. And the second is something else entirely. We'll talk about that. I swear, designing a helper robot that looks like a killing machine must be a prerequisite for space-age living. Like, if you're gonna have a moon base that people can travel to and enjoy, you're actually contractually obligated to build evil-looking robots that have a failsafe built in to just start killing people in the event of a lockdown. Because that's what happens here and seemingly in every other space horror game ever. They're cool, but they're also like 7 feet tall and look like they could rip a car in half. Did they have to be designed to look so menacing? In universe, I mean, I get it. They're good. They're no frills, and you know, if you've seen one of these kinds of enemies, you've seen them all, but it's more of how routine implements them that makes them so scary. The first time you encounter them, one just sort of comes down the elevator behind you. No fanfare, no drawn out cutscene, it's just sort of there, and it's after you. Another thing, they will sometimes, seemingly at random, go into a hibernation mode, reactivating after a while or if you make too much noise. It creates these great moments where you'll spot the hard outline of a bot frozen down the hall, or when one powers down right where you need to go. Or around a corner that you can't see until it's too late. It adds some unpredictability, which is very much appreciated. Often in games with limited gameplay like this, the inclusion of patrolling enemies can feel really bad, but here they do just enough to be interesting, even if they're only contained to a couple levels. You can zap them with your scanner to momentarily stun them, which is really all you need to get out of the situation. But they're otherwise pretty relentless pursuers, and when you hear those heavy stomping footsteps coming your way, you need to leave. Like I mentioned, one of the regular objectives here is to upgrade your tool with various modules that change its functionality. One of these takes you to a shopping center area that really leans into that retro vibe, but it's eerie and oddly out of place on an otherwise cold space station. Like, look at this display. It's really good and uncomfortable that really the only remnants of life on this place are less the people who lived here and more of the big box chain stores that took up space. Sometimes some of these scenes reminded me of those weird vaporwave spaces with the water and the statues and the neon, and then simultaneously some of the tight corridors reminded me of the back rooms almost, all heavy yellow wallpaper and fluorescent lights. It's constantly uncomfortable no matter where you are. There is some incredible use of color and darkness here. Every corner you turn has some kind of evocative, creepy imagery. It's made even worse when you have to look through the little CRT screen on your scanner. It's got this great dithered effect like you're watching old CCTV footage. Routine plays with darkness really, really well, and the only way to actively use your flashlight is to look through this screen. It blocks out your periphery and tunnels you down this tight POV that's just so fucking scary. Yeah, while there may not actually be that much lurking in the shadows, it certainly doesn't feel like it. But then it'll do weird shit like this where something in the darkness here keeps fucking up my scanner, causing me to reset it. Yeah, it may be a magnetic field or whatever, but I'm not so sure. So it's not just the robots that have gone haywire on the moon. There's other stuff, like this thing. I love this thing. I think everyone loves this thing. Similar to the robots, this thing, Entity A, patrols around a couple of locations in the second half of the game. He'll show up and give you a hard time, sometimes actively pursuing you, other times just fucking sitting there waiting for you to walk by. It's terrifying. This stuff is the scariest thing to me. There's just so little fanfare about it, and that's why it works. The game is not at all concerned with setting up orchestrated scares, instead letting the vibes and the stillness kind of sink in until you come across something horrific like this, totally on your own. Seeing this thing sitting in the corner brought me back to when I first played Silent Hill 4 and I saw the twin victims just standing down the hallway pointing at me. Just horrific. He's more aggressive than the bots, but he'll disappear entirely sometimes, seemingly at random. Sometimes he's invisible, sometimes he's just sitting there. His area is probably the longest, requiring a couple trips to and from, which I don't mind, but could be a little too backtracky for some. Accompanied with him is the best puzzle in the game, and a pretty satisfying loop of upgrading your security clearance to unlock doors to progress, all while under pressure from this fucking thing. And that's most of the gameplay in Routine. It's a humble but effective system to deliver a vague but interesting story, and a vehicle to soak up all of the 80s space age horror. But I should emphasize how clean it all feels, the way you interface with your tool, swapping the modules in and out, clicking through terminals. It all feels good to do. The story is similarly unobtrusive as the rest of the gameplay. It's there for sure, with enough clear threads to keep you engaged, while of course offering some weird stuff on the back end that you may want to do another playthrough to examine. And speaking of the story, as I've said before in previous videos, with games like this, games that rely on somewhat vague or evocative storytelling, I find that a lot of my personal joy of that story is removed when I drill down and explain away every beat. I like the mystery, and I think that the beauty of the story are in the moments, the concepts or themes that you kind of latch onto, and the speculation that those bring. Those are the things that I remember long after, less so the story as a whole if I have researched it and studied up on every facet. With a game like Routine, a blurry, kind of amorphous story full of loose ends and evocative imagery is exactly what I want. So from me, please expect me to ponder and maybe draw some connections, but not to come to any hard conclusions. And hey, before we get into it, if you've made it this far, I would really appreciate you clicking on that thumb thing and maybe hitting the subscribe button. I love talking about games like these, and I would love to share that with you going forward if you want. Cool? Thank you. Okay, so something has gone wrong on the moon. You may have noticed that by now. You could say moon's haunted, but maybe that's not right. You play an unnamed engineer sent to diagnose an issue with the core systems on board, but by the time that you arrive, things have gotten significantly worse. You also may have not been the first engineer sent to help. There's actually a pretty noticeable shift in the game, where the first half sees you slinking through the derelict station, following in the footsteps of senior leadership, struggling to figure out what's going on and how to right the ship. Everything is pretty straightforward and sensible. Then around the halfway point, something changes. The focus shifts to the less tangible evil moon stuff. You're less worried about malfunctioning robots and more worried about not turning into a flower. I think your enjoyment of Routine will depend on what kind of space horror you enjoy. If you like your story a little more tangible, a little more survival horror, like Alien Isolation or Dead Space, you may enjoy the more sensible threads and enemies of the first kind of half of the game. But if you like your horror a little more ephemeral, a little more speculative, you might sink into the weird body horror of the second half. I admit this opens up a weird pacing issue with the game. There is a pretty sensible lead up to the climax of shutting down the lockdown around the midpoint. You're sneaking around, upgrading your security clearance, and getting some inklings as to the greater story. But once you do clean up the lockdown, that momentum is kind of gone and no real build-up to anything else happens thereafter. I think from a story perspective, there is an explanation for this, but in the playing, I felt like it kind of came to a grinding halt. For the first half, you're trying to track down a person named Kai, though that sort of just stops unless I missed some payoff to her thread. You're also chasing a facilities guy who's trying to restore the system like you are, though his story does wrap up. Those are kind of the main threads before you shut down the system that's gone haywire. After this, the story gets a little harder to follow. You start to experience blackouts, a symptom reported on by medical staff from people who have entered or been near the canal, a sort of fissure inside the moon of natural or unnatural origin. The canal is bad. That's made pretty clear pretty quickly. People who have experienced these blackouts are also reported to have moved around the station and do things in a sort of sleepwalking state, seemingly in an attempt to move closer to the canal. The canal is first reported after a seismic shift of some kind when it's discovered. Now, if I'm understanding the story correctly, there are sort of two locations on the moon, somewhat separate from one another. There's Union Plaza, the touristy living station place that's having the system lockdown issue, and then there's the Prism Institution area, a kind of research lab that's only reachable by a jaunt across the surface of the moon, which, sidebar, is an incredible sequence. The pure silence of space, the bleached white ground against the inky emptiness all around you, the jagged outlines on the horizon that, at least for me, always made me think something was moving out there. It's very good. Anyway, they seem to be studying the canal over here with testing chambers and chem labs designed around addressing an infection that is seemingly acquired from being around it. They uncover a life form on the moon, Entity B, a kind of mammalian slug thing that isn't directly hostile. I don't know how it gets aboard the station, but it makes its way inside and dies after attempting to eat an apple, of all things. Researchers speculate that perhaps it's due to its anatomy being incompatible with human food, but the creature has a human-ish physical appearance, so where did it come from? What was it eating before this? How did it survive this long? After studying the corpse, they note that it's female, implying that a male mate should be out there somewhere, which is a creepy and effective way to imply that, hey, look, there might be a whole ass ecosystem out there. And there's also some Garden of Eden and the creation of man imagery here, but that's another thread that I'm not going to chase down. I like the vibes. There is something evocative in that upon discovering a life form on the moon, the thing just fucking dies without too much impact. Doing something as small as choking on a fruit, it undercuts the gravitas of the situation in a way that feels really fitting for the atmosphere of the game. Whatever this thing is, it's not a cosmic being beyond our comprehension, it's just a creature, constrained by its anatomy and mortal like the rest of us. Then there is the other thing, Entity A, which is the creature that stalks you in the later parts of the game. This thing is weird. It's implied to be living around in the lower areas of the base, finding large amounts of waste and hair stuck in the vents. It can go invisible and feels very primitive in its behavior, the way it wails and moans and how it seems to attempt to interface with a camera the last time you see it. It seems to recognize Entity B and appears remorseful, or at the very least, seems to experience some kind of negative emotion upon seeing its corpse. It doesn't appear directly predatory. I mean, yeah, like it'll kill the shit out of you if you're captured, but it feels more like mindless killing as opposed to a predator-prey kind of thing. It's a weird, jumbled up creature, not a perfect specimen. I want to know what the fuck it's doing when it's just posted up like a gargoyle. Either way, people get infected with something hanging around the canal with escalating symptoms, all of which our engineer has been experiencing. Around 60 days, they die, and then immediately they start producing a fungus and start to bloom. We don't know exactly what happens after that, but one body you can find that appears in advanced stages of whatever this is You can see this fleshy thing coming out of its body, so you could maybe draw the conclusion that things like entity A and B are either people directly infected or they're kind of a spore-based offspring that are born out of the bodies. The only thing about that that's weird to me is that there is a lot of flower imagery in the game. Blooming and dying, rebirth and blooming again. I get that, but I can't help but feel that like the design of the entities and the flowering bodies and accompanying imagery just feels really disparate. It's like they're two totally different design concepts. If they do come from the flowering bodies or are otherwise related to the infection that you get from the canal, they don't appear physically related at all. The entities have an entirely fleshy and human body. They don't appear to have any organic or plant-based influence. It makes me feel like the entities and the infection are two totally different concepts, but I don't think that that's the case. You see the same vines and flowering stuff at the end of the game when you, of course, make your way to the canal, at which point the ending gets even more surreal. Safe to say our engineer has caught a case of the moon virus and will soon be sprouting some flowers of his own, another host to whatever is coming out of that thing. So we can maybe assume around the halfway point of the game, our engineer starts having these blackouts. He's working his way towards the canal, as did everyone else in the station. You could explain away what to me feels kind of like the aimlessness of the second half, as our objective just becomes go to the canal and do whatever the fungus mind sickness wants from us, though I'm not sure that explanation makes that clinkiness feel better. While the main plot of the narrative only really comes into focus in the second half, it's interesting and fittingly vague for a space horror. There's a really great journal entry that you can read where the researchers speculate that perhaps the humans on the moon are simply nutrients in a greater ecosystem, which I think is a really good point of speculation for the story. The routine of life and death, hosting life after death, simultaneously sustaining one and the other, flowering into something new from the nutrients of another. Where do we fit in this cycle? I really liked Routine. Despite the murder bots and the giant humanoid creatures, it's still on the quieter side of survival horror. It has a fantastic sense of place with its uncanny 80s inspired future, its neon and its darkness, its arcade cabinets and its clunky analog devices. There is some serious attention paid to retaining that atmosphere, that restraint, and it shows in its scares, allowing that isolation and tension to terrify you rather than big set piece sequences and giant scares, though those do definitely happen. Honest to God, all of this game is one of the scariest I've played in recent memory, and it makes very few attempts to actively scare you. Rather, it sets in when you're futzing around with your malfunctioning tool or when you're looking through its blurry monitor. It is an oppressive atmosphere that never really lets up over the course of the game. I was a live wire on edge and absolutely unwilling to use that unreliable flashlight on my tool to see what's down that next dark hallway. Your mileage may vary with the story and with some of the pacing stuff, but I absolutely recommend Routine for anyone that has an eye for effective use of tone, atmosphere, and restraint in their horror. Thanks for watching.
We started this journey together, chasing the unknown.